your podcast app. You'll see there's a discourse happening. Is this book a masterpiece or problematic? One's a lifelong diehard fan, the other's a first-time reader. Both are really smart and funny and attractive. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. Talking twins and hierarchy. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. Relentless focus on their bodies. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. What do they mean by all American? Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. No sex, just titillation.
Hi, Robert.
Hey, Fardo, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
It's so fraught. I don't even want to say it. Okay, so today we're doing
Oh,
Sweet
God.
Valley High number 10, which is called Wrong Kind of Girl.
Woof. And listener, even if you haven't read, you know exactly what this book is about. You don't need to listen to this podcast. You know what they're talking about, and it ain't pretty.
And particularly if you've read Power Play, you have read this book.
Please note that one of my early notes is, and I quote, "This is just power play with sluts."
Yeah, but it's like just the name of it gives one a chill, and it's bringing the chill of seeing it as a child. I'm like really wanting to give a hug to my like
Oh.
inner child who this was one of the first things I learned about sex.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to give her a hug. I want to give Annie a hug. And of course, most of all, I want to give Jessica a big, big hug. But we will get into it. Let us go to the cliffhanger.
We've just finished like running a race and stuff. Annie is sitting in the stands. She's wearing slutty clothing. Basically, what we know about her from the previous book is that she's a sophomore. She dresses like a slut, and they call her Easy over and over and over again. And she wants to try out for the cheerleading squad. And we know that at the end of the last book, and Jessica says very clearly
Not gonna
that's not gonna
happen. And Elizabeth's ears perk up.
Yeah, of course. Annie is talking to Jessica, not Elizabeth. And then Annie walks away and Elizabeth goes, "Good luck, Annie." "Why do you say that?" Jessica asked her sister. "I like to see hard work rewarded. It paid off for Roger today. It'd be nice if the same thing happened for Annie." "Why? So she could use her cheerleading uniform as an added lure for the boys?" "Annie's not like that." "Where have you been, big sister? On Jupiter? That girl's got to hold the school record for the most dates. If date is the right word for what Annie does." "I didn't know you were keeping track." "I keep my eye on every girl who expresses an interest in joining the squad. Every single cheerleader is a public representative of our school, and it's my job to make sure they're deserving of the honor." "And you think Annie's not deserving?" "Think nothing. I know that girl is just a whole lot of bad news." Elizabeth shook her head. It was clear that Annie was going to have trouble with her sister. "But if she knows all the cheers and does them well, you've got to take her, don't you?" Jessica stopped and put her hands on her hips. "Liz, I don't have to do anything I don't want to do, but I'm willing to bet anything she chickens out when it comes time for tryouts. At least she should if she knows what's good for her." Annie was really in for it, Elizabeth fretted, recognizing that hard tone in Jessica's voice. She'd sneaked around the rules once to deny membership in her sorority to a girl she didn't like, so it wouldn't be surprising if she did something similar to Annie when it came to the cheerleading squad. Elizabeth saw nothing but trouble ahead for the shapely, unsuspecting Annie Whitman. Big trouble. What trouble is in store for Annie? Find out in Sweet Valley High number 10, Wrong Kind of Girl.
And isn't it always the case? Elizabeth sees trouble ahead, that inevitable trouble coming her way, and the thunderclouds are moving in, and though this is coming, and hopefully she doesn't get shipwrecked trying to save her sister. When you were reading the cliffhanger, something jumped out at me. When Jess says to Liz, like, "Are you on Jupiter?" about the consideration that Annie could be part of cheerleading.
Mm-hmm.
In Power Play, she said to Liz, "Liz, are you completely absent from this universe?" regarding the suggestion that former fatty, never forget, Robin Wilson could be part of PBA because, you know, they'd be calling us the Pied Butterball alphas and we'd be lower status by association. And I think like very similarly, this book is about her trying to do this boundary maintenance to kind of establish there's the good kind and the bad kind. And, it kind of didn't work when I tried to do that with Robin. And now we're just going to sort of erase that fact. And when we introduce her, she's this elite, popular cheerleader. And that just sort of didn't happen. But now this is my chance to kind of reify those boundaries. So,
shall we to the Coover?
Sure.
Hit me with that Coov.
Oh gosh, and I so just love that I get to see you see it every time. I get excited. This is part of the podcast I enjoy the most, Robert.
Oh, well, good. There's only 6
I
hours.
know, but I do want to say something.
Uh-oh.
2 times ago, you were a little bit rude, and you said, "I'm not holding the cover nice, and I must hold it in one place." And you this and that, and it turned out you were missing an important detail that I was trying to draw your attention to. So this time, I hope that you are going to give me grace and assume that I know what I'm doing here.
Okay. I do, and I will. Show me that Coov. Okay. We have on the Coov 2 young women, one of whom is very familiar to us because she seems to be, I would say, 5'6", with a perfect size 6 body, blonde hair. She seems to have a dimple in her left cheek. So one of them is clearly Jessica, and she is looking with kind of a smirk at the other woman who is looking straight at us. That other woman has short brown hair. She kind of, listeners, you may not know what I look like. She kind of looks like me.
Sorry. That's not what I was thinking. I was thinking she has like what my friends and I used to call Jerry Seinfeld hair, which is just like that big puffy short hair.
Annie is wearing like a lavender tank top.
Slut color.
Oh, it's a slut color. Yeah, of course. The color of sluts, lavender. And
she's wearing an absolutely whorish purple tank top.
What's interesting is, so Jessica is wearing, obviously, the Sweet Valley High cheerleading uniform. But what's interesting in this moment is like, is it like a sweat blouse? Is it a sweater?
Yeah.
It's like she is covered up. You see no exposed skin on Jessica at all. And so on Annie in her whorish purple tank top, you can kind of see a little bit of skin, but it's still like, it's not the least bit risque. You could absolutely wear it to school.
I have a feeling there's a detail that you just haven't visually been able to catch on here, which is she does have a tear. There's a single tear. Another thing, she either has the most dark, long, and lush natural eyelashes I've ever seen, or she's wearing an unholy amount of mascara because her bottom and left, there's such dark lining and such, like it's a lot of makeup, I think. And a sort of non-trivial amount of rouge on the cheek. And by the way, Jess, I think, also has a little bit of makeup on.
Yeah. But a prudish amount of makeup, not a whorish amount of makeup, certainly. Did she look whorish to you?
Well, Robert, I think part of what's going on in this book, I got to think about this now. And do I want to get into it now? I'm fine. Are you familiar with a poem called The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost?
I am familiar with The Whore Not Lived by Robert Frost.
So I'm just going to show you my little PowerPoint here, if that's okay.
Sure. Listeners, she does have a PowerPoint. She does, I believe, understand that this is a podcast. Oh my God, this PowerPoint is 49 slides long, listeners.
No, Robert, this is from something else. I'm just showing you a couple things, okay? No, and I know it's
a podcast.
I know it's an audio medium, but we're gonna be doing, but it's a little bit text analysis. It's gonna be relevant, okay?
Okay.
Come on, you know where I'm going with this.
Of course, The Whore Not Lived.
Exactly. So The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost.
Mm-hmm.
Robert, could you please read me the first 2 lines of this poem and the last 2 lines, and we'll just do that.
2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Now, what do we have here at face value? A story about there was 2 roads. One of them was the one everyone likes to take, and the other was the one that actually no one ever takes. But I was being brave and different, so I took actually the different kind of one, and now I am old, and I'm so happy I did that. Okay? That's the story America likes to tell herself.
Sure.
But what is really going on here, Robert? Okay. You actually look at the poem, and you look at the descriptions of these 2 supposedly extremely different paths. One of them is described as being bent in the undergrowth. The other one is described as being grassy and wanting wear. What does this actually mean? They're both kind of a little bit worn out, okay? They're actually not that different. And then you read in the poem, it says, actually, the people passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. Okay, they had the same number of unfucked leaves. And then the real story okay, is in the end of the poem when the speaker says, I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence, that I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Okay. So what this poem is really about is the need to construct mythologies about ourselves. And so I think a lot of what Wrong Kind of Girl is about is they are the same. Okay. The dance contest, Jessica and Annie are the same. They are equal whores. Jessica's out with a different guy every week, and she talks about Annie being out with a different guy every week as if that's like remarkable, when every single behavior that she's describing in Annie is her own exact behavior. And her compulsion to create this boundary and validate that they are different and that one is bad and that's not her one, and she's the one that's actually the good kind of girl, the right kind of girl, is because her anxiety is actually the same, and she might be wrong kind of girl.
I love what you're doing here. I think that the title invoking the wrong kind of girl presupposes, of course, that Jessica is the right kind of girl. They're on the cover juxtaposed next to each other so that we can see this is wrong, this is right. I think we see lots and lots of echoes of Elizabeth's need to divide herself from others. In some ways, Jessica this time is playing a sort of Elizabethan role of needing to assert the extent to which she is in the right and people who do things differently from her are in the wrong. I mean, listeners, just so you know, Pardo's giving me kind of a what's more aggressive than quizzical, like an angrily disbelieving look.
I just think calling it Elizabethan is strong when we've seen Jessica do this exact same tendency in Power Play.
Wasn't that Elizabeth doing that? Elizabeth was drawing those distinctions between, she was saying like, oh, I'm good and PBA is bad, as if PBA were so different from her when she was a member herself.
Yes, and I would love it if you could sort of consider being able to hold two things at once. And so it's yes and that. And also, Jessica had to distinguish herself, desirable, aspirational, cool, whatever, versus the Robin Wilsons who are tubby and are undesirable and look like a blimp. And if we're associated with them, they're going to start calling us butterballs.
Right.
And PBA can't accept everyone. So it's the same. They're doing the same thing.
That's not the same thing. I don't want to fight.
Robert, the way here Jessica is saying like, we can't accept her. She's gonna muddy us by association if we accept everyone into the cheerleading squad. You don't think there's any parallels to her saying if we accept a fat girl into PBA, our image is gonna look bad? Right. What are you saying?
I think what I'm saying has not been adequately conveyed, because I'm absolutely not saying that.
I'm actually like angry right now.
I want to be clear. I think I maybe didn't express myself clearly, because what I'm trying to say is in Power Play, Elizabeth is just like the other girls in PBA, and she is drawing a distinction between them to say, I am right and you are wrong, and we are so different. We have traveled different roads, even though they traveled the same road. In that book, Jessica and Robin are not the same and are not traveling the same road.
No, but the whole point is Robin eventually gets skinny, and Jessica freaks out because she's like, how dare she be because Jessica's freaking out that if that's not the difference, what is? Her whole thing is she's not to be. And when you were talking about the running and the performative watching Robin run and the spectacle of it, Jessica's trying to say that's not to be looked at. I am right. That was your argument. I'm agreeing with you. Right. Yes. But so and that's why when she had her weight loss, Jessica was so upset by it. And she said to Elizabeth, like, it can't be possible. This isn't right. She's like a demon inside. How dare she look beautiful? And Elizabeth said, it's her right. She did hard work. And so it's like, well, wait a minute. Now she is as good as me. And so now in this book, it's like, well, if Robin's the same as her and as good as her, who's then the bad one to be different? So it's Annie.
I mean, we don't disagree. And yet you're still somehow fighting with me because you refuse to see what I'm trying to say. Like,
I see what you're trying to say. And I'm saying they are both doing different versions of this boundary defining and telling themselves a story that's different than what it actually is. Right.
Right. Like, and in Power Play, the main locus of that story is Elizabeth distinguishing herself from the other PBAs.
What in the world do you mean by main locus?
I mean, the thing we spent 4 hours talking about.
Because we are interested in it. I'm just talking about things that happened. I'm not going to focus on you did this. I'm going to try to explain what I'm feeling or what I perceived and what I've experienced. Okay, because it's not your fault. It's not my fault. What I experienced, and this probably was a misconstrual of what you were saying. But what I thought our conversation was the following, which was we were talking about the fact that Jessica is compelled in this book to say Annie's the wrong kind of girl, right?
Mhm.
And I'm the right kind. And then I went into my digression about Robert Frost.
Sure.
Okay, which took us to the question of people framing things in the world as different to be able to tell themselves a story. And it's
Right.
more about that compulsion to do that distinction. And then you were saying, and so Jessica in this book, when she does this, oh, she's wrong kind of girl, is doing this sort of Elizabethan thing, which we've seen Elizabeth always have this compulsion to be like, I'm good, they're bad, which I agree. Okay.
Right.
And the point I meant to raise, I don't think it's so much her doing this. I don't think it's so Elizabethan thing, because the compulsive boundary defining in order to sort of confirm your ideological thing about like being a certain social type and identity and stuff is something we have seen before in Jessica in Power Play, when she was so wanting to Robin to be different from them and not part of PBA, and that being symbolic of her sort of insecure thing about being desirable and worthwhile in the school and like have social capital, all this kind of stuff. And so then what I thought you said was like, what? No, like only Elizabeth did that. And then I was like, what? Like, I'm saying they both did that. And then you were like, but the locus of the thing. And I was like, what?
So I think for me, a couple of things happened.
I'm dying. I'm dying. This is actually so funny. Keep this in.
We're not keeping this in. We just
Oh my God.
25 minutes about how we agree with each other. We're not keeping this in. My only point is this book is about two people who are very similar, who are one of whom is drawing that dividing line, which you very skillfully pointed out with Robert Frost in the digression, and we totally agree about that. And then we totally agree that in Power Play, Elizabeth was doing that too.
And that Jessica was doing that too. Robert.
And that Jessica too was creating those ideological categories and drawing those boundaries.
Yeah, i.e. doing that too.
i.e. doing that too.
Right. So we don't necessarily have to call it an Elizabethan thing to do if we've seen Jessica do it too.
Yeah, I'm not willing to go that far, but but
I guess, like, are we on the same page about at the level of paraphysical content?
Yes,
like,
we've been on the same page the entire time, except for you giving me several dirty looks.
Okay, I don't think I have really anything to apologize for, but I am able to move on. Are you? Do you need anything from me?
I think in the interest of having a podcast, I'm ready to move forward. Do you need anything from me?
Wait, what about in the interest of friendship? I don't want to just have podcasts. I want to have friendship.
Yeah, well, I think friendship-wise, we may want to stay probationary, but I think podcast-wise, I'm going to keep reading the books.
Robert, please don't make jokes when it comes to if you're mad at me or not, because that really confuses me.
That's fair. I'm not mad at you.
So we're not probation?
We're off probation. Okay. Think of yourself as Annie Whitman having studied for that math test. You got a good enough grade that you're off probation.
So that brings us to the title.
We already no, Pardo, no. We've done the title.
Okay, well, do you want to know the taglines? Okay, on the back it says Jesse. Oh my God, these taglines made me mad. I'm going to tell you, these taglines made me mad.
Maybe that's why you're bringing this energy to the podcast. The taglines got you all riled up. Yeah,
similar to the introduction of Dr. John Edwards in Dear Sister, my writing took on the sort of the scrawlings of a madman, just based on the taglines. So on the back it says, Jessica's at it again, exclamation point. On the front it says, watch it, Annie Whitman, exclamation point. Jessica's out to get you, exclamation point. I'm
Why
just
does it
like,
make you so angry?
I'm just like, we get it. Like, do you have to literally like take Elizabeth's perspective like every second of the day? Like, can we not get 1 second of like what would Jessica's taglines for this be? Maybe they'd be, you know what, Annie? I might have done a lot of really bad stuff. I'm really sorry I slut shamed you, but I just have my own stuff going on. I hope that one day when we're adults and after I've had a lot of therapy, I can write you a nice letter apologizing.
Okay. So that that does sell, that moves copy. I'll give you that. That is maybe in the last 20 seconds of the book. The tagline for 90% of the book from Jessica's perspective would be I hate sluts. Mm-hmm. Which would also sell books. So maybe they should go with that.
Works too. Okay. So I guess that takes us to
plot summary. Annie Whitman is a sophomore who goes on dates with lots and lots and lots of boys, and she wants to join the cheerleading squad.
Jessica no likey. Jessica makes schemy. to keep Annie outie, but Elizabeth get her little nose into the business as usual, and ultimately some pretty upsetting stuff happens, and then they end up letting her into the squad.
Great. Speaking of the really upsetting stuff, I don't really know how trigger warnings work, but I will say to listeners who may feel uncomfortable with thoughts of suicidal ideation and self-harm.
Yes, very good.
I just want, like, you may not want to listen to the back half or any of, you may want to skip this episode. But so we've got this overarching frame where Annie wants to be a cheerleader. Jessica doesn't want her to be a cheerleader. And for some reason, Elizabeth gets involved. It is ghostly echoes of Robin wants to be in PBA. Jessica doesn't want her to be in PBA. Elizabeth gets involved.
Yeah, but so instead of being fat, she's actually skinny, but she is unfortunately Jessica's and many of the other kids at school's minds a slut.
She's referred to as Easy Annie by many people throughout the book. We see throughout the book, she goes on tons of dates with different guys. One thing I don't think we ever, I wanted to get your opinion on. Do we think she is actually sleeping with all of these guys? Or even kissing all of these guys? Like, what do we think the extent to her sexual aventuras is?
I think it's probably somewhere in between I think it's probably less than the sort of implication, but probably more than what Elizabeth and Jessica are doing. In other words, something beyond kissing, potentially.
Wow.
But
what makes you say that, though? That's what I don't totally understand.
But what I was going to say is that sort of would be my guess if I had to guess. But what I think is that the fact that it's actually ambiguous, I think is a really nice way of reinforcing the point of the potential. She's actually a mirror of Jess, and like, is it actually any different? She dates all the same guys. She wears short skirts. It's literally like she just does Jessica same as Jessica. So it's like, but so yeah, I think the fact that we don't get any real confirmation on the sort of brass tacks of penetration and so on, I think is actually supports that.
And the thing that I find very interesting is that Annie herself seems to be pretty unaware of her reputation.
Yes, the naivete.
Well, that's
the absolute naivete.
And I can't totally understand what we are to make of that. Because on the one hand, it led me to believe like she can't actually be doing stuff with all of these guys. Because if she were doing stuff with all of these guys, she at least wouldn't be surprised by her reputation.
Oh, I didn't interpret it that way. I interpreted it as one of the questions Elizabeth sort of poses throughout the book to Jess is like, at first it's like, oh, she's not that bad. Like, she doesn't actually do all that stuff just because like, and then Jessica's answer is like, oh yeah, she actually does. And then Elizabeth's thing is like, Elizabeth always comes back to, how bad can it be? She's only 15. And I think part of the question this book is posing, or part of the discomfort that this book creates and may or may not interrogate, is like, can a child like be bad? And if children can be bad, which children can be bad? And I think also just the discomfort of describing a child as basically slutty. I also wonder if it's a way for the writers to sort of this like hooker with a heart of gold kind of thing of like, it's like, well, if she's like, she may be sort of promiscuous, but if she doesn't get it, then it's like we can have empathy for her. Whereas if she were more savvy in that way, maybe like, how could we sympathize with that character because she is a bad slut? You know what I'm saying? It's like the only way to make her someone we could relate to from that ideology. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I just find it, the whole time I was expecting there to be a moment where it gets revealed that all of these guys are spreading rumors about her, but they're lies. And like,
really?
She doesn't do that. Of course. There's something about the way that she talks about going from date to date and the way that like,
but I think it also has to do with her family relationship and like the way she is sexualized by adults in her life. Eventually we're introduced to her mother's boyfriend called, I think, Johnny. And he is like a very active creep and says creepy, disgusting things to her and to Elizabeth. And the mother also like always calls her kitten and always remarks on how attractive she is and how attractive Elizabeth is and, oh, you're so pretty and all this stuff. And so both the mother and the boyfriend are in the habit of, I think, inappropriately sexualizing children in a way. And so she has maybe grown up in some ways, and she talked about the modeling she did and how everyone treated her as an adult.
Yeah.
And she's experienced a sort of adultification, maybe in the way vis-a-vis of like sexualization as a child, that maybe has made her just sort of, I don't know, comfortable in that realm. Like maybe when she was modeling, she probably was used to like exploitative relationships with professionals. Her mom's not exactly attentive to her. Like, I don't know, like maybe that's just sort of how she's been socialized. You know what I mean?
Am I reading the first paragraph? What's happening here?
Yeah.
As she looked over the list of girls who had signed up to try out for the cheerleading squad, Jessica Wakefield purred like a satisfied cat. As co-captain of the squad, Jessica felt she was where she belonged, in charge of everything. Strictly speaking, Robin was also co-captain, but Jessica had been heading the squad longer, and Robin pretty much let Jessica run things as she wished.
I think in Heartbreaker, the first line also described Jessica as purring. I think she purred into Bill's ear, "Kiss me," when they were rehearsing the play. Yeah, and just like I am offended by her being. I just feel like she's always just like in the first few sentences we get something like her being manipulative or her being like, I don't know. I just don't like it, and I feel like that's what the purring is.
It's also weird. She's not, at least in that book, she's like purring as she's speaking. Here she's silent and just kind of looking over the list and purring, which is a very strange image.
Can we actually take a second and like, what do you think that sounded like?
Which makes no sense.
She can roll her R's.
Yeah, oh, she could definitely roll her R's.
I think the next sentence is important. Look at all these names, Jessica told her twin sister Elizabeth. Everybody wants to be a cheerleader. The previous few books saw Jessica get sort of out of her element. She's had all these destabilizing interactions with men. She's had all night long. Then she got Elizabeth in a car accident. Then we had new Liz. Then Heartbreaker. She didn't get the outcome she wanted with Bill. She thought she was going to get the acting gig. She didn't get it. Racing Hearts. She got let down by Dennis. And right now it says she felt she was where she belonged, in charge of everything. And so I think like what this book is about in some ways is like Jessica's trying to feel comfortable in her place, and to like have more control.
That makes sense. There's also just the idea that she gets off on the fact that everybody wants to be a cheerleader. Like everybody wants to be who I am.
The same way with PBA, she was upset that Elizabeth thought it was just a silly sorority. With this, she's really, I think, anxious for Elizabeth to say like, wow, that's great. You've got all these names. Like, it's, really, this is something that is looked very well upon in the school. And like, that's also, I think also like she just really wants that.
I think also we talked about how this is power play with sluts, but one of the ways that it's different is this is membership into an elite society of which Elizabeth is not a part. What I was kind of trying to say in power play when we had that like 45-minute fight was power play was about Elizabeth drawing those boundaries between herself and the PBA girls. And in this book, Elizabeth doesn't have to draw those boundaries because she's not a cheerleader.
Yeah, what I was trying to say was that a book can be about more than one thing, and that while power play certainly was about Elizabeth's sort of compulsion to define in that way, and I think we discussed it at length.
Great.
It certainly also wasn't not about Jessica defining herself in contrast to the sort of fatties of the world.
Absolutely.
So it goes into Jessica's sort of estimation of the cheerleaders of Sweet Valley High. They were the cream of the crop, the prettiest, most sought after girls, not only in the school, but in the entire town. And then she starts describing them. And the first one is Robin Wilson, who's described as, we've already learned that she's a co-captain who basically lets Jessica run things. And then we learned that she's the current Miss Sweet Valley High. It's so striking to see, just like, it's again the free and direct discourse, but it's Jessica's perspective of the sort of logic of why everyone thinks the cheerleaders are great. And so in her sort of description of Robin Wilson, the fact that like the whole story of how she used to be someone who like, it was so inconceivable that she could be part of the group. And now it's that is completely erased. And she's just described as the current Miss Sweet Valley High as an example of how aspirational this group is. What that shows us is like, okay, so that boundary has now been collapsed.
One thing I liked about the rundown of the cheerleaders is that it's giving Bring It On, like the very opening scene of Bring It On, where they're introducing all the cheerleaders. I was like, oh, did Francine Pascal invent that? Because it does like, it kind of, I'm still big red.
Robert, you ain't seen nothing yet, because let me tell you, later in the series, there is a 3-part miniseries specifically about cheerleading. It's called V for Victory, the Pom Pom War, and I forget what the other one's called. Sure. But this girl, Heather Malone, with a freaking red Mazda Miata, we'll get into it, rolls into town and gives Jessica a run for money with the cheerleading. And they do this whole competition and this and that. You're going to love it. It's so much fun.
An interesting moment to me is when Jessica tries and has tried over and over to get Elizabeth to join the cheerleading squad. We're told that over and over again, Jessica wants Elizabeth to be a cheerleader, which I don't totally buy. so much of Jessica's identity is born up in and tied up in being a cheerleader that it seems very strange that you want Elizabeth to kind of encroach upon that. Elizabeth joining the cheerleading squad would validate Jessica's interests some. Is that part of it, maybe?
Yeah. And maybe it's also a thing of like, the reason she wants her to join isn't because like, oh, it'd be fun if we both do it. It's because the two of them together will make a sensation. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it's sort of safe in the way that Elizabeth's never going to be as a good dancer as her. She'll never be as good cheerleader as her. So if she joined, like they could make a sensation, but she's still going to be the captain. So
it's also giving Chicago. The two of us together would be so sensational. She told Elizabeth at least 137 times. It's giving like, I can't do it alone from Chicago. I'm not going to perform the whole thing now.
I only know one song from Chicago, and I'm not going to sing it.
I assume it's When You're Good to Mama.
No, walk through the door. Bum, bum. I could tell you were a man of distinction, a real big spender. Good
That's not
so
from
refined.
Chicago.
It's not.
That's Sweet Charity.
Is it from anything?
Yeah, it's from Sweet Charity.
What's that?
It's another musical.
I never heard of it. You're wrong. You're definitely wrong. Okay. So Jessica is trying to basically engage Liz to be interested in this topic of all these people have tried out for the cheerleading squad. How's she going to possibly choose? Elizabeth is sort of like not really wanting to participate in this. And Jess keeps trying these different angles to get her interested. Like, don't you have school spirit? Like, how am I going to choose? Like, isn't this exciting? Like, da. They start talking about whether Jessica, like, we find out that Kara Walker and Lila used to be on the squad and then got temporarily kicked off for a prank they did against Palisades, which, okay.
They Lila set off the sprinklers. It's the weirdest side story ever.
Kara wants to come back on the squad, and Elizabeth is asking Jess basically, you know, are you going to automatically let her in because she's your friend? Jessica says, no, I'm not, but I just know she's going to make it, and Jessica's going to train her and make sure she can make it. Then Elizabeth brings up the topic of Annie Whitman. Jessica says, I don't want anybody like that on my squad. You know what they call her, Easy Annie. She's been with every guy at school. Elizabeth, like everyone else at Sweet Valley High, had heard the rumors about Annie. It was a sad situation. Annie was one of the most beautiful girls in town, but she had a very bad reputation. She seemed to fall deeply in love with one guy after another, but each deep love never lasted more than a night or two. So this is an interesting tone of condescension. I'm going to be nice to you and not just say she has sex with one guy every night after another, because then you would be a slut. But if you're in love with someone is when you have sex with them. So I guess she falls deeply in love every night.
I guess I'm trying to read this kind of ambiguously, but you're right that the idea of like the use of the night rather than lasting a day or two does feel kind of pointed and leading us to believe that she is at least going farther than Jessica is.
Then Liz is like,
it's probably just a lot of talk. You know how guys like to brag, Elizabeth said. Oh, Liz, why do you always believe the best about everybody? That interchange was so interesting to me because I think Elizabeth is saying something that is certainly true, that high school boys brag and lie. I mean, what she's really saying is guys are lying and saying they're going farther with Easy Annie than they are. And like her reputation is the result of kind of chauvinism, sexism, misogyny, and the fact that guys are shitheads. And Jessica's response to that is, oh, Liz, why do you always believe the best about everybody? Which was so jarring to me because it's like, that's actually not even really believing the best about anybody.
Kind of similar to Power Play, where Elizabeth thought she was being the ally by helping Robin get in instead of to like challenge the norms of the institution. Here, like Liz's defenses of Annie are either like, it's the guys are exaggerating, she's not as much a slut as they say. Or like, okay, if she is as much a slut as they say, she's trying to change. She never, of course, challenges the assumption that being a slut makes you bad, irredeemable. Like, obviously, the wrong kind of girl is bad.
Yeah, because literally in the next sentence, she says, I happen to know her little, and I know she's trying to change. She's worked very hard to get her grades up. There's this kind of B plot about how Annie's grades aren't good, and she needs good enough grades to be a cheerleader. And that's how Elizabeth kind of gets to meddle, because she meddles by helping Annie and tutoring Annie to get Annie's grades better.
Yeah, and the whole time it's like Elizabeth just doesn't want to believe it could be true. She's trying to find some explanation. Like, it's like, oh, you didn't go on a date last night, right? Or, oh, you did go on a date with Tim. I guess you guys are an item. Can I put in eyes and ears? He must be your boyfriend then, right? It's like she cannot handle it because she's so horny for Todd and can't fuck, and she's jealous.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much like just repression in this, and like the disbelief that Elizabeth purports to feel about the fact that people could be physically intimate. One thing that I do like about the way that this mirrors power play, but is different from power play, is that in power play, Elizabeth is doing all of these weird, backhanded, manipulative, gross things, like bribing Bruce Patman so that Bruce Patman will take Robin. And here we get to stick with just simple math tutoring. Feels much cleaner, feels much more appropriate. Like there's much less, I think, mental gymnastics on Elizabeth's part to be like, is what I'm doing okay? Because what she's doing is just tutoring a girl in math, which feels okay no matter what.
For heaven's sake, Jessica, how bad can a 15-year-old sophomore be? One of the reasons I think it's interesting that they made her younger than them, it's like, because every time she asks that question, how bad can a 15-year-old be? She's only 15. It raises the implicit of like, if Annie's sluttiness isn't bad because she's 15, is my sluttiness okay? Or 16 means like, no, I'm responsible for that. Now I actually am bad, you know?
Jessica gives voice to what she's like. She puts language to, I'm the captain of the cheerleaders, Liz. I'm not going to have our whole squad tainted by Easy Annie. We get the first like really clear moment that we're supposed to see Jessica and Annie as much more similar than dissimilar, when Jessica is trying to like paint Annie as being terrible. And the way she paints Annie as terrible is by saying, you remember that wonderful Rick Andover, the wild maniac who kidnapped us and almost got us arrested and killed at Kelly's bar? Guess who was running around with him last night? It's just like, Jessica, pause for a second. You just mentioned that this guy kidnapped you and Annie's been with him. And your thought is not like, maybe we should protect Annie. Maybe we should be worried about Annie. You just want to judge and blame Annie? Rough stuff.
Let alone your example of her being bad is doing a thing you did a few books ago. Why are you using that example?
Yeah. There's also an interesting moment. We get introduced to Caroline Pierce.
Notorious gossip.
Okay, so what's interesting to me is she is a notorious gossip. She's our very own telephone gossip. And it's like, wait, Liz, you literally write the eyes and ears column. So when you do it, it's awesome. And when Caroline Pierce does it, she is, and I quote, sharp-eyed and evil-minded. So interesting.
Wonderful. And that is the creation of difference of Caroline's the wrong kind of gossip. Elizabeth's the right kind of gossip.
Exactly.
And it's funny they mention that because actually I had a big note to myself that just out of context any particular book, but I wanted to talk about eyes and ears and how like we've never really talked about the fact that it's just sort of taken for granted that like she writes a gossip column. And it's like Jessica and her friends like to gossip. And the descriptions of the two twins is always like contrasting Elizabeth against her. Like Jessica likes gossiping, going to the beach and dancing. Elizabeth likes this and that. And it's like, and like Elizabeth spends 6 hours a day on her newspaper column, but it's like her newspaper column is gossip.
Yeah.
And she's always asking people questions and then being able to use the thing of like, can I put it in eyes and ears? Oh, I'm just keeping my eyes for eyes and ears. And it's like, again, she's a messy girl. She absolutely loves gossip. She absolutely loves drama. And she is officiating this absolute panopticon at Sweet Valley High vis-a-vis the eyes and ears. These children are under constant surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just normalized and seen as okay.
And beyond that, they go, every time they talk about eyes and ears, they go out of their way to be like, it's the only gossip column someone would want to appear in. And like, you do it in such a nice way, Liz. And it's like, huh.
Something in the milk ain't clean.
Which brings us to milk count. Were there milks in this book? I don't
think
so.
There was milk in this book, but it's later.
Speaking of the Oracle, does it surprise you that the Oracle, the school newspaper, lists the 75 names of the girls who try out for the cheerleading squad? This is truly, truly unhinged.
Except when we remember a detail from the last book that Elizabeth was working for what seemed like months on this highly anticipated article about the fact that Mr. Pendergast gives jobs to high school kids in the summer.
Yes.
And this article about like possible jobs for high school kids in the summer, like was like her biggest item in months. She was like obsessing over this. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the Oracle is not exactly, content is scarce. Okay,
that's fair.
And they're sort of reaching. Yeah.
It also brought to mind last book when they all get out of school to watch the tryouts for the run. It's like, this school is obsessed with people trying out for things. We gotta watch. We gotta see what's going on. We gotta get our eyes and ears on the 75 girls who are trying out.
Yeah, and then in the previous one, they all got time off for the play.
Right. We get introduced to the idea that Annie's really struggling in school. She fails a math quiz. She did rotten. How rotten? Oh, I think I got the first part right, where it says write your name. After that, zilch. That was a pretty good line. And immediately Elizabeth gets into, did you study for it? She goes, you didn't study last night? And she's like trying to back Annie into confessing, quote unquote, what Annie's actually doing instead of studying.
And then Annie says that she actually didn't stay home last night. She's like, I guess I should have. And then it says, given the opening, Elizabeth couldn't resist dashing through it. You mean you didn't study last night? So Elizabeth can't resist basically an opportunity to shame someone. But also it's just, again, the fact that she gets personally something, it's like the chance for like to show someone else that they are wrong. It's like gives her this fucking thrill. And then what really was interesting to me is that then a couple of pages later at the beginning of chapter 2, it says that she hadn't been able to resist Annie's plea for help the day before for like tutoring help. But I didn't see a plea for help, right? Elizabeth pulled this information out of her. And, you know, she said that she's struggling. And Elizabeth's like, why? What am I going to do about the math stuff? You know, maybe she's sort of passively implying it. I didn't hear a plea. Okay.
Yeah, there's not a plea. There is definitely passive implication. And then we do get some of Annie's kind of psychology. She says she feels really worthless.
Mm-hmm.
This interaction really, for me, kind of isolates what the problem of this book is. Sometimes I feel so worthless, Liz. What? Elizabeth said, truly surprised. You? Why, Annie, you're just about the most beautiful girl in Sweet Valley High.
Beauty is worth is beauty. Beauty is worth is beauty.
It's just really sad. I mean, this really is like heartbreaking to me that this young girl, 15, so young, is like crushed and feeling bad about not doing well in school and people not respecting her. And Elizabeth comes back with, you're so beautiful, as if that is like the rejoinder, as if that is the way that we can establish worth for her. It really made me sad.
It is very sad.
And then there is some sense that Annie kind of understands what's going on a little bit. She giggles, yeah, boys like me. I like them too. But I don't know. Maybe it's because girls sometimes seem jealous of me. They're not as friendly. It's like she does kind of understand on some level that the girls are kind of prickly towards her. And she's got some insight into girls don't seem to like me. They seem to be jealous of me. So we talked at length about kind of Jessica needing to divide herself from Annie as the wrong kind of girl because she'll be tainted, because she needs to be very, very different. We didn't really talk about the potential that Jessica is actually jealous of Annie, that Annie has some level of freedom that Jessica doesn't have.
Of being able to fuck?
I think maybe of being able to fuck.
Yeah, because Annie just sort of has decided it's okay.
Yeah.
So everyone else might call her slut and she may or may not be aware of it, but that's not a burden that she appears to be necessarily carrying.
Right.
And so whereas if Jessica was fucking all these guys and same rumors and stuff was happening, she would carry that burden because she would have that internalized judgment, whatever. Yeah, for sure. And he's like, what am I going to do if I don't get my math grade sorted? I'm not going to be eligible to try out for the cheerleading squad because they can't take you if you're like on academic probation. And then don't worry. Elizabeth tried to console her. You'll make it. Unless my darling sister has something to say about it, she added grimly to herself. So first of all, you'll make it. She's guaranteeing something she cannot guarantee. Same like she did with Robin. And then again, we have the sort of dear sister, darling sister sort of tension.
We then get Elizabeth visiting Annie's home. Wait, did I say home? Sorry, it's not a home.
Oh my God, it's a freaking poor apartment.
It's an apartment. Could you imagine? Not only is she slutty, but she lives in an apartment.
And she lives in an apartment with her mother. That also means broken home. So it's poor and it's broken potentially. Yeah. Now it's going to turn out they're not actually so poor because they got modern furniture because the mom made some money modeling, but they're not rich. Okay.
Yeah, they're definitely not rich.
That home is one level to be sure.
Oh gosh, you think they could split those levels? Don't even dream. We get again Elizabeth kind of echoing her power play need to convince herself that she's doing the right thing.
Yeah, she says, I am doing the right thing to herself again.
What's weird to me about that is in this moment, I actually think she is doing the right thing. She's just tutoring her in math. So it's what's funny to me
she's
is
not just tutoring her in math. She just guaranteed to her that she would make it on the cheer squad. She's doing way more than she's getting involved in. The math is an excuse, Robert. The math is the way in. She's doing no. Elizabeth says this is a nice apartment. It's small but attractive with ultra modern furniture. She had never been to her home before. Annie had preferred to stay after school and have Elizabeth help her. It's okay, I guess, Annie said, if you like small apartments with too many people around. Now, I got to say something here. We'll get the introduction of the mother's boyfriend, okay?
Mhm.
So Liz says, I thought it was just you and your mother. And Johnny makes three, Annie said bitterly. Elizabeth stared at her blankly. Annie had a brother? Johnny is my mother's very special friend. He lives here too. We're just one big happy family. So obviously there's issues and whatever. And then it says, Elizabeth wished they had stuck to the subject of math. Mrs. Whitman's personal life was really none of her business. That line, Mrs. Whitman's personal life was really none of her business. Such slut shaming is implied in that line. Calling the fact that her boyfriend lives with them as if it's intimate details of her personal life, what that's doing is making a value judgment on living together, not married, because she is framing that topic as inherently salacious because they're not married. If they were married, why would she be blushing at having this information? I could understand not wanting the information necessarily, feeling uncomfortable knowing about their tension and their problems maybe, but just the fact of having a live-in boyfriend, and that really fucking pissed me off. And I'm like, well, maybe I'm overreading that. But then later she starts asking Annie basically, so do you actually fuck? And like, that's actually her personal business. So you don't care about personal business.
Well, that I think was also getting into the idea of Annie being only 15 and like whose personal life is part of Elizabeth's business and whose personal life is not part of Elizabeth's business.
But I really think it's also really strongly about just defining that as personal business when it's something it's literally just who lives in your household. Annie leaves the room for a minute to get her math books. Elizabeth sent a silent message to her sister. Forgive me, Jess. I'm about to get in all the way. It reminds me of like, may wild pygmies hang me by the thumb if I ever help Jessica with a scrape again. It's like her saying I'm about to go in. It's like, and in a way I sympathize with her because it's like she is recognizing her compulsion, but it's just like for her saying forgive me, it's like she knows it's wrong. Well, and then she actually says to Annie, I actually am a good listener if you do want to share things with me.
She says, Liz, I don't have one real friend in the world, which I think, of course, calls to mind Lila Fowler and the idea that she's also relying on Elizabeth as the one person. Elizabeth has this gross thought. If only Annie
also known as Elizabeth's kink.
Yeah. If only Annie had one gay guy like Todd, Elizabeth thought, she wouldn't need an army of other guys. All you need is one good queer.
That was also a sad line.
Yeah.
Similar to the like, but you're not worthless, you're beautiful. It's like the answer to being lonely is having a boyfriend, Yeah. It's like
it's just having one good guy.
Yeah, it's not self-esteem or friends.
We get that her mom was a teenage mother.
She talks about how their parents split pretty quickly, and then she says, are your parents together, Liz? The suddenness of the question startled Elizabeth. Well, yes, she felt strangely guilty about having terrific parents.
I would just say that feels like another moment where Annie is perceptive enough to be like, I can kind of see you judging me a little bit. Like, are your parents married? Like, she kind of can read the situation and be like, oh. And of course, Elizabeth's parents are married. Do we get any description at all of Elizabeth's parents that you might want to share for the icky
we get
moments?
This sort of unfortunate line. She was so proud of her tall, dark-haired, good-looking father.
Vomit. Could you imagine being so proud of your tall, dark-haired, good-looking father? Icky, ooh, the icky.
No, Elizabeth is
gross.
And then she has the nerve to say, so what would she do without his warm support, not to mention his sense of humor? Oh my God.
Oh, please. His sense of humor, lawyer logic, please.
And mom. Even with her career, Alice Wakefield was always there when the girls needed her. Something kind of interesting that I think is happening with Elizabeth and Annie. And we talk about how Elizabeth and Jess are both engaged in this sort of boundary setting, good, bad, and so on. But I think Elizabeth is also doing some boundary setting around like good families and good parents.
Definitely.
And she is doing a lot of like contrasting of Annie's family life with her own. And like, she's shocked to even hear a question, are your parents together? Because of course they are. And she is practicing and articulating this sort of gushing gratitude about her parents. And she says this line, even with her career, Alice Wakefield was always there when the girls needed her, and that she has her father's warm support. I don't believe we have seen that. I don't believe we have seen that Alice has been there for her. In fact, I feel we've seen the opposite. And so just, part of what we're seeing in this book is like Elizabeth seeing what she feels is like capital B bad mom and she's doing a lot of like, well, I'm so lucky my mom's so different from that. But how different are they actually? Alice Wakefield and Mrs. Whitman. Alice Wakefield may not be drunk all the time, but I don't think she's exactly paying attention.
Elizabeth says, well, would your grandparents help? And Annie says, my grandparents wouldn't help. They thought my mother was bad. There was no way they would help. Everybody in Annie's life is drawing these lines around her, and she is always falling on the wrong side of that line.
And it's interesting that her mother was 16 when they were born, and that the grandparents thought she was bad. Because before we were asking, so it's like part of the sort of unasked question or sort of asked around question is like, can you call a child bad? And is a 15-year-old too young to be called bad? And can a 16-year-old be bad? And so what she's implying here is at least the grandparents thought a 16-year-old was just pure bad. And like Jessica says some of these things, like she's just plain bad, It's very sad.
But Annie is not willing to kind of wallow in that. She says, no, Liz, I don't want you to feel sorry for me. My mother's not like yours, but she's okay. She's pretty gutsy, really. She could have given me away, but she didn't. She did the best she could, I guess. I think there's just these moments where Annie is so close to breaking through. She's so close to being able to acknowledge kind of the strengths that she sees in even her mother, who's been thrown away by society. She can still see some strengths there. And I just wish she could kind of turn that inward and see some of her own strengths and her own kind of gifts.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like in some ways, she may be very naive, but in some ways she's very perceptive and her understanding is actually quite sophisticated and mature. Yeah.
I agree.
But then she talks in these ways that's like, oh, that yucky math. And like, I guess boys like me. And it's like,
we find out that Annie did modeling. It was kind of fun for a while. I got to wear these really fabulous clothes, and people were always making a big deal about doing my makeup and fixing my hair. When they got through with me, I looked 18 or 19 instead of 13. Everybody treated me like an adult during the modeling session, but as soon as the makeup came off and I was back in jeans, I was just a kid again. Everyone said I was wonderful while the cameras were clicking, but when the session ended, they ignored me. I finally realized they didn't care about me, the real me beneath the makeup and the clothes. I was still lonely. My mother didn't have time for me because of her schedule, and I guess I just didn't know how to make friends with girls my own age. There's just this truly heartbreaking, again, it is in some ways her perception, her ability to see what's really going on that is what is breaking her own heart. Because I could see tons of 13-year-old girls who would just, or 13-year-old people, who would just think like, oh, the attention is fun and this is fun and I get to wear fancy clothes and like, oh, maybe I'm not the star once the camera's off, but at least I'm having fun. And she's perceptive enough to be like, no, they didn't care about me. They didn't ever see the real me. Sometimes I would look at myself and not even be able to identify my own age, and that felt wrong to me.
Yeah, she has a wisdom.
She has a wisdom. It's like almost Pretty Woman-y, like where she's like shrewd and can kind of see through some bullshit and she kind of knows what's going on.
Well, and then Annie says, like, don't you see, like, the way I'm going to change my life is by improving my grades and getting on the cheering squad. The kids will respect me if I get good grades and if I'm on something as important as the cheering squad.
Well, I think there's also, to get back to the road not taken of it all, like, we start with Jessica talking about how important it is for the cheerleaders to be respected and how she gets respect from being a cheerleader and how everyone looks up to them and they can't be tainted by all of this. And so we see that they have basically kind of the same thought process around the importance of being a cheerleader.
And then there's this incredible moment where Elizabeth's like, yeah, but there's other activities you could do. And she goes, oh, you're wrong, Liz. There's nothing like being a cheerleader. Annie seemed amazed that anyone would put anything above the cheering squad until she remembered whom she was talking to. Oh boy, am I dumb. Annie smacked her forehead with the heel of her hand. Of course, the oracle is just as important. You have to be almost a genius to write the way you do. What Annie has presented to Elizabeth is the idea that, that just like Jessica's perspective, which is cheering squad is like the top. It's the best. It's great. It's the most admirable thing one could do.
Elizabeth's thinking like, God, she would be so good on the cheerleading squad. And she thinks to herself, those rumors about Annie just had to be exaggerated. She couldn't be as horrible as Jessica said she was. But how do I find out the truth? Elizabeth wondered. There's so still insane. This framing
so
of
insane.
Like, horribleness and like she needs to uncover the truth. We get Annie's mother coming in. She comes in and says, hi, kitten, we're home. Of course, the book opens with Jessica purring like a cat.
Jessica also calls Annie Elizabeth's pet.
Mrs. Whitman is drunk. Her words are being slurred. And then in comes Johnny. It's just like, I don't want it to, I mean, it's so gross. It's just he's a caricature of a lewd, gross, disgusting pervert man. He leers at Elizabeth, he makes her skin crawl.
He says, call me Johnny Sugar.
All the cute little girls call me Johnny. Annie is again perceptive enough to shield Elizabeth from Johnny. She's immediately like, no, Elizabeth's leaving, we're gonna go.
Jessica and Kara are at the Wakefield's place, and Jessica is helping Kara practice and sort of train her so that she will be successful at the cheerleading tryouts. And Stephen has come home. We haven't seen Stephen in a while. He is back home from college.
I've missed his handsome face.
Kara has a little crush on him. He doesn't really seem to notice. He seems kind of distracted. Jessica is still a little bit frustrated that Stephen is seeing Trisha Martin, who, similar to how Annie is the wrong kind of girl, Trisha Martin's family is the wrong kind of family, also alcoholism, and they also are poor.
We're now at the tryout. 75 cheerleader hopefuls show up for cheerleader tryout. Girls are everywhere. There are tons of people in the stands watching as well. We meet Ricky Capaldo. Is Ricky Capaldo sexy?
Well,
He's
let's
small,
see.
he's
Small,
dark,
dark, and shy, and not what anyone would call handsome. But those who looked closely were sure to notice his warm brown eyes.
So it's interesting.
He's the manager. He's the manager of the cheerleaders.
What's interesting to me, I forgot to mention this earlier, there are only 5 total cheerleaders for the whole school.
Yeah, that seems so small.
It's really small.
I mean,
also
they literally can't do a pyramid.
Literally.
You need 6 people. Am I wrong?
No, minimum 6.
I mean, you got 3 on the bottom, 2, 1.
Yeah. We're doing some cheerleading stuff. I will say, love or hate cheerleaders, this is a great cheer. We who are about to win, salute you, go Gladiators. That bangs. I'm sorry, that is great. Annie gets to her cheer.
Mm-hmm.
She's great. Jessica's face is the only one in the gym that isn't happy. This tryout is to make it to semifinals, to be able to try out again, and then to try out again. It's just such an elaborate.
We gotta fill a book, Rob.
We gotta fill a book.
Yeah, so Helen's brother is Tim Bradley, and we see that Jessica is annoyed when she realizes that Annie seems to be hanging out with Tim. But he's a senior and she's only a sophomore, Jessica muttered. She was mildly interested in Tim herself and had thought he was there to watch her and maybe buy her Coke afterward. But there he was, leaving with Easy Annie. And then she tells Helen, you better watch out for your brother. He's with that slut Annie. And then she sort of tells Helen, by the way, those aren't rumors. Like, she really is a slut. So this is doing 2 birds with 1 stone, as it were. One is to hopefully get Tim less interested in Annie, and also to secure Helen not to vote to accept Annie into the squad.
Can I call your attention to Ricky Capaldo's quick joke at Annie?
Flashdance?
He says, great going, Miss Flashdance. Have you seen Flashdance?
I don't remember.
Oh, it's so good. But the basic plot of the movie is that Jennifer Beals is a stripper, but all she wants to be is a real ballet dancer. And so there's all of this kind of difficulty as she tries to negotiate how to go from being the wrong kind of girl to the right kind of girl.
Love.
We find out that Annie is running off with Tim because at the end, Annie comes running up to them glowing and happy. Is that all for today? Because I have a date. And it just again kind of made me think, like, what is her understanding of how people perceive her and what her life is like? And is she completely oblivious? Does she not care? Is she just getting a soda with him so it doesn't matter anyways? It just feels like if you knew that people were calling you Easy Annie, I don't think you would run up.
No, she doesn't know.
She's no.
Ricky
That's what I'm wondering.
her.
Like, how does she not know?
No, at the end, Ricky tells her they call you Easy Annie. She's like, what? Remember?
Yeah, that was completely fucked.
Yeah, but like, yeah, I think she's not aware of it, but she also is sort of has been comfortable in this space of like, you know, she said, oh, maybe girls are jealous of me or whatever. So it's like, maybe she's sort of telling herself a bit of story in that way and like not wanting to see what people are saying or whatever it is. And there's like it's a little bit of both of that maybe, because I think like what she does get out of these relationships is the sort of temporary, albeit illusory, intimacy.
Right. And respect.
Which, yeah, or this feeling of someone paying attention to her, liking her, caring for her, even though it's over in a night and they always disappoint her. Annie makes it to the next level of tryouts. She's excited. Liz says, oh, you and Tim went out. Can I say you're an item in eyes and ears? And he's like, no, we're just casually dating. And Elizabeth's like, again, like so sad that Annie has to be such a slut. And then we get this scene at the beach disco.
Pause for 1 second.
Sorry.
We've never seen the beach disco before. They just dropped the beach disco in like it's something we know about.
Whoa. We've never seen the beach disco?
I don't think we've seen I've never been to the beach disco.
Beach disco's huge.
Where are the droids? Why am I listening to the Surfers Wave?
Yeah, I mean, occasionally there's other bands that do perform. Jessica was wearing a black and red striped top and her shortest skirt.
And then Annie comes in. She's instantly catching everybody's attention in a slinky outfit with a skirt that had a slit almost to the top of her thigh.
And as if that wasn't enough, she was accompanied by Bruce. Okay? Yeah. I.e. a recipe for triggering Jess even more.
Which, of course, Annie doesn't know.
Right. And then the backstory of Bruce and Jessica is described as a battle of wits.
Yeah. No. Todd and Elizabeth do this weird role-playing
caveman thing.
He's Tarzan, she's Jane. I guess whatever he's got to do to get it up for her. I mean,
she's like, want to help me wash the car in his ear? And he goes, yeah, I'll help you do anything. And he draws her closer. She goes, easy, caveman. And then he goes, you want me to carry you out of this place? Meet Tarzan, you Jane. Let's go fight a couple of vines. And then she goes, and then she punches him in the midsection. You idiot, me warrior. And vines are my least favorite form of transportation.
I thought that was a good line.
We have a couple moments here of Todd's like attentiveness to Elizabeth's emotional state. And I think this is meant to provide a contrast to Alice, because where Alice never notices what's going on with them emotionally, Todd is so perceptive. Elizabeth just has a look on her face. He always knows, and he asks her. And it's that thing about Todd represents the womb for Elizabeth. He is a warm, safe place, and he is emotionally supportive in a way that the mother is not.
I think there's also a contrast there between Elizabeth and Todd's relationship and Annie's relationships with all of these guys. Like Todd is being a nurturing, protecting, loving homosexual partner. And then Annie has all of these terrible guys who are just like flitting in and out.
And I do want to say that again. I think we do get a few other things in this book of like how Elizabeth's messy involvement in other people's shit impacts her relationship with Todd, because she can never really be present with him because she's always distracted.
We get some beautiful language.
With the dance the dance contest. Oh God, this dance contest is a really great scene. Really
the Surfers' waves began whipping up a foam of music, and Todd and Elizabeth happily plunged into the rhythm, along with Jessica and Skip Harmon and Annie Whitman and Bruce Patman. Just like beautiful, evocative language. Skip Harmon is the best dancer of all the guys.
He and Jessica whirled around the beach disco, outclassing everybody except for one other couple, Bruce and Annie.
Obviously. Annie, it was clear to see, was a natural.
Okay, Mel, who I guess is the beach disco manager, danced around holding his hand over the heads of the couples to see who got the most applause. And finally, only two couples were left on the floor, Skip and Jess and Annie and Bruce. All the kids knew Jessica was one of the best dancers at school. Her blonde hair streamed out around her as she moved in perfect harmony with the music. Ooh, Skip Harmony.
Ooh.
He's a good dancer. But nobody had ever seen Annie Whitman on the dance floor before. It was clear Jessica had some competition. And then Mel holds his hand over each of the couples, trying to gauge who has more applause.
Oh my God, wait, who's going to win? Who's going to win? It's a competition. They're so different. The two dancers are so different, Pardo. Who's going to win? Because they're so different. They're but just such different dancers. Who's going to win, Pardo?
And Robert?
Yeah?
And both that morning equally lay. And leaves no step had trodden black. Okay, they're the same. So even Mel, the beach disco manager, can't find a difference between them, and that is frightening.
That is frightening. Well, not to me, but to them. And then poor Annie has this moment of happiness when they both are crowned co-winners. You and me, Jess, isn't it great? Wasn't that something? I sure showed Jessica I was good, didn't I? Poor sweet
And then
girl.
Poetry, when at the end we have Annie say, don't you think this will make a difference? Oh, yes, it'll make a difference, Elizabeth thought. The odds against Annie's making a cheerleading squad had just gone up to 1,000,000 to 1. And what is this book about? It's about making a difference. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And what is going to, quote unquote, make the difference between these social types? Then we get an interesting moment in the next chapter where Elizabeth asks Jess, like, Jessica's ranting and raving about Annie, and Elizabeth goes, what exactly is it that you think she did? She made a total fool of herself by dancing in front of everybody. By dancing? By dancing with Bruce Patman. Jess, is it possible you're so angry because Annie did as well as you did? That's absurd, Jessica raged. That's how she wasn't as good. It was just the novelty of seeing her dance for the first time. The absolute nerve of her standing there trying to pretend she's as good as I am, as good as you or any of us. Well, isn't she? No, double no, triple no, 1,000 times no. You want to say easy Annie as acceptable? No, 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 no.
Jessica kind of hopes that maybe Annie will just fail the marking period and then she won't be able to be a cheerleader anyways and everything will just be resolved. And Elizabeth goes, oh, no, she's been studying. She'll be doing better. And Elizabeth says, did it ever occur to you, Liz, that letting her on the squad would do us all Jessica says, did it ever occur to you, Liz, that letting her on the squad would do us all a world of harm? Not if she's changing, Jess. Well, she isn't. She's still easy Annie.
All right. Jessica realizes that Elizabeth has been tutoring her and she feels betrayed.
We're back in the gym. We're at the semifinals of the tryouts. You need to do the Go Gladiators cheer, then 2 cheers of your choice. And you got to finish it up with a split. The split's what separates the want tos from the can dos, Helen Bradley told Jessica. And she was right, of course. Of the 25 girls, more than half couldn't manage the split. But Annie Whitman wasn't one of those. Annie was a can do all the way.
Sounds
How
like the right kind of girl.
dare you, narrator?
Wait, you're saying can do means...
She's a can do all the way? Pardo, come on.
Oh my God,
No, come on.
Wait, I didn't get it. Oh, because she's doing...
Get out of the gutter.
Wait, you mean because she can do a split? Wait, get my head in the gutter? What are you saying? What are you saying?
I'm saying the narrator is calling her a slut. She's a can do all the way.
Because it's the splits?
Well, I think just because she goes all the way and you can do her.
Oh, I thought you were saying it's like also like because it's the splits, like you're doing this, like the reason she could do the splits. All right. In any case, that's nice. All right.
So we got that.
And then I think we have an indication. You know how we were asking about like how similar is it to Power Play in the sense of like, is Jessica the only one with a problem? And we see that Jessica is the only one who doesn't want Annie Whitman to get in because everyone else has voted for her.
Yes. I mean, voted for her to make the finals. We're still not picking an actual squad, of course.
And so now Kara Walker, Sandra Bacon, and Annie are still all on the list. Then it's back to school. We see that Ricky is starting to have a crush on Annie. He slips a note to her that really just made me smile, where it said, congratulations on being one of the 8 finalists. I just thought it was sweet. He's
a sweetheart. I'm a huge Ricky head.
Oh, yeah.
I wish he were gay so we could date Todd. You know what I mean?
Well, he might be.
I'm watching that. You better believe I'm watching that spot. After school, Annie knows she's joined the top 8 and Elizabeth joins her. And Annie says, it's funny, but I'm beginning to feel a lot differently about myself. I used to think I wasn't much, Liz. I'm beginning to think I'm not so bad after all. When they applauded me, I felt that I was even respected. This is all beautiful. And then she says, I think I'm going to cut down on my dating. I used to need a lot of attention, to make up for that empty feeling inside. But boys aren't always the answer. I've made a lot of mistakes with boys, I guess. How do you do it, Liz? How to do what, Annie? How do you have a friendship, a relationship like you have with Todd Wilkins? I mean, you two always seem to be having so much fun. I've never had that kind of thing with a guy. I think it takes time to develop a good relationship, Annie. Time and trust and respect.
I.e. not fucking. Is what she's saying.
Of course. I don't think any boy I've known has respected me.
Do not say of course.
I'm in the middle of a really touching moment. I don't think any boy I've known has respected me. And I don't think I've ever respected any of them. But that's all over now. I'm a different person now. I'm almost a Sweet Valley High cheerleader. There's this, it's interesting. It's like, it's very sweet. She realizes that she's changing. And I actually think on my first reading, I thought this was pretty sex negative and pretty fucked up that she's like, I'm doing better, so now I don't need boys anymore. But I actually think she's just kind of being perceptive. And she's kind of saying like, hey, I was using these boys to fill a gap in my life that I'm going to fill in a different way. And I don't think that necessarily has to be sex negative. And so I'm like really proud of her.
I went through the same thought process where I was like, Okay, well, yeah, it is a legit thing that if she was spending time with boys and they weren't necessarily the most genuine or fulfilling relationships, and it was sort of trying to meet a need that she probably wasn't getting met at home and like in other parts of her life, then yeah, maybe it is good and fine that like as she's getting fulfilled in other ways and having more esteem and happiness and fulfillment out of other activities, like she's not sort of displacing it onto them, which like could be a very real thing, doesn't have to be sex negative. So I agree.
Yeah.
And then Elizabeth's like, Enid, have you heard the rumors about Annie? And Enid, I think, provides a really interesting contrast to Elizabeth here. Because Enid just sort of doesn't care.
Yeah.
Like she's not triggered by all this like Elizabeth is. It's like Enid here, and I'm not an Enid fan, but I think Enid here presents a model of like what a normal reaction to this would be, to like just the fact of Annie would be, which is like, have you heard any stories about her, Enid? Stories about her and boys, I mean. Elizabeth didn't really want to hear the answer to her question, but she had to ask. Stories at our school? Enid rolled her eyes in mock surprise. I hear they're going to change the name to Rumor Valley High any day now. Elizabeth laughed. Okay. Then you have heard about Annie? Enid hesitated and basically says, like, yeah, I've heard it, but you know how the rumor mill is. People always exaggerate stuff and whatever. And it's like she's had her own experience with that. And again, it's reifying the thing of like, well, if it's true, then it would be bad. But just like the fact of like not being so invested in these rumors and not like the more you're invested in them, the more you're feeding it, right? So it's like Ian's just like, yeah, just ignore it basically, which is like sort of a good reaction.
Then we get this, the book takes a brief detour here. This whole time we've been talking about cheerleader tryouts, and all of a sudden we are stranded on a desert island with, say, 17 or 20 other people. We've been divided up. We're building our own shelter. And then we're voting people off the island. That's right. Survivor has come to Sweet Valley. And Jessica, you know, Queen stay queen. Jessica is Sandra if I've ever seen her.
She's whipping those votes, and she's whipping them up good.
It's amazing. The way that Jessica is able to play Helen is so Survivor brilliant. Helen, the image and the very integrity of the cheerleading squad are in terrible danger. Annie Whitman, you know what kind of girl she is. Your own brother won't have anything to do with her anymore. You've seen her strutting around, haven't you? Out with Bruce Patman one night, with that Rick Andover the next. It's one guy after another. If she gets on the cheerleading squad,
herself.
Literally. If she gets on the cheerleading squad, everyone will think we're just like her. I just wanted to find out how you feel about it. Who would you like to see on the team? Are you fucking I mean, Jessica is Sandra. This is brilliant. The way that she says all of this stuff, and then she knows how you control a vote. You don't throw out the names. You start asking questions. Who would you like to see on the team?
And then she's like, it's all down to you, Helen. Like, this is actually really important. Like, you have a really, really important role. Like, you're going to be the deal breaker because Jean West is going to vote for Sandra Bacon.
It's very simple, Helen. It takes 3 votes to be selected, right? I'm going to vote for Sandy Bacon. That's 1 vote. Now, tell me who Sandy Bacon's very best friend is. Oh, it's Jeannie West. Right. So Sandra Bacon has my vote and Jeannie West's vote for certain. She only needs 1 more. Your vote will decide, Helen. I mean, come on. We are snuffing torches here.
And Helen goes, then it's all fixed. Jessica smiled sweetly. Yes, and you decided the whole thing.
It's so effing brilliant. She's amazing. There's this moment where Annie and Liz are talking. Annie's like, have you ever heard anybody talk about me? And Elizabeth says, well, everybody gets talked about. And Annie says, sure, they talk about you as a writer and the nicest girl in Sweet Valley. But what do they say about me? And Elizabeth goes, listen, what difference does it make? You know that the only thing that matters is how you feel about yourself. What a lie. I mean, she's lying to Annie's face. She doesn't believe that. She's been spreading these rumors as she's been like mock concerned about everything.
Yeah, same way she like basically lied to Robin about how the Pi Betas felt about her.
Exactly.
Then we get this really interesting scene, I think, at Todd's house, where Elizabeth is there to watch a movie. Again, Todd is attentive to her emotions.
Absolutely.
Okay, Wakefield, out with it. What's on your mind? You're hardly paying any attention. What's wrong? So again, like Todd is where she goes. Todd is the one that sees her in that way. Again, her distraction and investment in Jessica's business is creating distance between them. And then he hugs her and she feels safe and I love you, and they kiss tenderly and everything else. He sort of suspects that she's been distracted from Jess, and then she's sort of annoyed and says, oh, you're coming for Jess, and gets all defensive. And he realizes like Yeah, Jess is up to something. They start fighting, and then they get interrupted by Mrs. Wilkins. Todd says, Mom, we're having a discussion. She gives them a knowing look. Discussions are fine, but in the interest of cake in the oven, keep the discussion down to a low roar. Then Elizabeth says, your mom is nice. And I think that was also a really interesting contrast to Alice, because if Todd and Liz were fighting in the Wakefield home, Alice is probably not going to necessarily come down and notice it.
There's also the other contrast that I saw was a contrast between
Mrs. Whitman.
Mrs. Whitman.
Yeah.
And there's this moment, Elizabeth says, your mom is nice. And Todd says back, it runs in the family, which again is just this idea of like lineage and taint. And the idea that because Mrs. Whitman had a child at 16, she is tainted and it runs in the family. And so that's why Annie's a slut too.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of has Scream vibes actually also that I'm just now thinking about. And then we get to cheerleader finals. Everybody is so nervous. They all hope that no one makes a mistake. Now, at this point, readers are like, why does this even matter? Like, Sandra's definitely getting in because of how we cooked the votes. And Kara's definitely getting in because she was going to get in no matter what. So, like, this all feels kind of performative.
Unless something unexpected happens.
Well, does anything unexpected happen, Pardo?
Well, yes.
I was hoping you'd chime in with the quote.
Before Jessica's horrified eyes, Sandra did a replay of her performance at Lyle Fowler's pool party, which, if you don't recall, involves hitting the polished floor with her front heel, bouncing off her back foot, skidding to a halt like a jet during an emergency landing, and ending up in a heap. Off went Sandra. Oh no, muttered Jessica. Sandra had blown her chances for good. All right, that leaves us with a spot open.
But if Annie screws up too, then who will get in? Oh, wait. Annie gets better and better with each move. Look at her, Maria Santelli cried in wonder. I think she has wings.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Robin Wilson agreed.
And then basically, Jessica is sort of backed into a corner where she has to finally sort of say the previously only implicit thing. Like, we have to worry about our reputation. We have to worry about our image. And they're like, but she's so great and she's so good. And then Jessica, I think, finally explicitly says, like, she's easy Annie. And then she issues an ultimatum that's basically, it's her or me. And if you guys want easy Annie on the squad, I'm out.
So we're at tribal council, and we're at a live council. Things are going wild. Jessica had the votes all lined up exactly how she planned. And then like the immunity idol changed hands or whatever. And all of a sudden her plan goes to crap. And she says, well, I'm not willing to go down with this ship. I just want everybody to know that if you vote for Annie, you'll have to find another cheerleader as well, because you won't have me anymore. Jessica Wakefield will not be on a cheerleading squad with Easy Annie. Make your choice. It's either me or Easy Annie.
Then the next chapter starts with what I feel like is a little bit of an inversion from a scene we had in the previous book where Elizabeth was lurking in the shadows while Jessica drank her milk and like sort of pouncing on her. And now like Jessica is also drinking milk, but this time she sort of has the power over Elizabeth in the sense that like she knows something Elizabeth doesn't know. Jessica comes home drinking her milk, smiling innocently and sort of evading Elizabeth's questions about what happened. She's like, we voted, and I dropped off the list of the new cheerleaders in the box at the Oracle, as I promised. Jessica had gone to the Oracle office with a list of the cheerleaders who made it before the tryouts and was like, Elizabeth, will you print this? And Elizabeth's like, no, it hasn't happened yet. And Jessica's like, yeah, but like, it's a sure thing. We know who it's going to be. Elizabeth's like, no, I'll wait till after the tryouts, which finally she does the right thing, ethically speaking, in terms of journalism. And then Jessica's like, okay, we have the tryouts. And Elizabeth's like, who made it? And Jessica's like, I dropped the list off at the Oracle, so you'll have to wait and find out.
Ricky has to pass Annie a note in Spanish class. Annie gets so excited. She thinks she's almost a cheerleader. And the note reads, we are sorry to inform you that you have not been selected for Sweet Valley High cheering squad this year. Thanks for trying and good luck next time. Annie gets so upset. She runs into Ricky. He tries to say he's sorry. She runs all the way to the stadium and up the bleachers and is in the back wall of the stadium. She is sobbing. He holds her and comforts her and tries to like buy her a lunch, buy her a shake. She just can't deal with like, how did I not get it? It's not possible. Like, how did this happen? How did this happen? And Ricky's like, well, there are only vacancies for 2 girls. And she says, yeah, but I was the best one who tried out, wasn't I?
And he keeps sort of having these little bit vague answers. And then she finally is like, well, who voted against me? And then he's like, well, this person thought you were great, and this person thought you were great. And so she basically, by deduction, is like, okay, this is who voted against me, including Jessica. And then
And he keeps trying to be nice. He's like, she voted for Sandra. That's all.
And then she basically is like, well, why? What was the reason? There must have been some conversation about it. So what was the reason? There must have been a reason.
I have to know or I'll go crazy.
And then he says, basically that Jessica had been the one to talk some of the others out of voting for her. And she's like, what was the reason? And he finally says, Jessica brought up the stories that some guys tell about you. Jessica said everyone in the school knew about those stories, and that if you were cheerleader, it would ruin the whole squad. And then she's hysterical.
Blinded by tears, she runs away. And then she's gone.
She is now hasn't been at school in a couple of days. No one has heard from her. Ricky is trying to get Liz to talk to Jess about it. Jessica says we had to keep the squad clean. I think, again, pure and impure.
Of course. There's also this moment where Ricky's like, I feel so bad. I shouldn't have said anything. I wish I hadn't told Annie what I said. And Elizabeth goes, you did what you thought was right, Ricky. Which is just so Elizabeth. Like, as long as you thought you were doing the right thing, it doesn't really matter if you ruin this girl's life.
Well, that's what she tells herself every day.
Exactly.
Yeah. Elizabeth gets a call from Ricky. They've rushed her to the hospital. Annie tried to kill herself.
Even in this moment.
Yep.
Alice mom goes, who is it? Annie? Is she a friend of yours? And Jessica faintly says, we know her. She wanted to be a cheerleader. And there are kind of two things about this. One is that Jessica is still refusing to claim Annie as a friend or claim Annie as any part of her life to refuse to be tainted by her. The other thing is that Alice is so absent from Jessica, from the twins' life, that she has no idea who their friends are and who their friends aren't. Bad mom.
To be fair, Jessica, it's not just about the tainting at this point. She isn't friends with her. Why would what Jessica said is true. We know her. Like, she's not going to go into the whole story. She's not her friend. Like, I don't think it's about tainting at this point. It's about the facts, because Jessica's now feeling really guilty. And then Alice, like, what stood out to me about this is they're freaking out that their friend attempted suicide. They go to the hospital. It's like, God forbid Alice goes with them. She's like, yeah, you can take the car, drive safe. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she's having some unsuccessful parenting here.
So that is going to bring us to SBHICU.
Feels a little inappropriate potentially for this heavy subject matter.
Wait, are you serious? It's always heavy subject. Elizabeth was in a coma, for crying out loud. I don't make the rules. I'm sorry, she's in the hospital. That's SBHICU. All right, so they show up, of course, at Joshua Fowler Memorial Hospital. There's conversation about how she's only a kid. Ricky is, how could they, Ricky is saying, how could they treat her so horribly? And there's this discomfort because Jessica being part of she apparently overdosed on pills, and Ricky had been the one who had a feeling something was wrong and found her unconscious at her home. He was the one who called the ambulance. Jessica's crying.
What's interesting, I guess, is how could they do this? What kind of stuck-up mean kids could do this to a poor, scared girl? And Jessica feels uncomfortable because she's part of the they, but Ricky is also kind of part of the they.
Because he told her?
I think so. Am I wrong?
Because he's part of the group.
No, not because he's part of the group, just because he's the one who told her. He told her all of this stuff that she she might not have known otherwise. I might be wrong on that. That might be a bad read.
I think, well, put it this way. I think it was probably a mistake for him to tell her that stuff.
Definitely.
I also think he was in a really tough position because, like, she really pressed him, and he spent a lot of time talking around it and trying to find other things. And like, I feel like he really tried. So, but yeah. Then Mrs. Whitman and Johnny come in, and then we get basically the same thing we got with Dear Sister, which is the doctor says she has no will to live, and the only way she's going to survive is if you let her to the cheerleading squad. So the doctor appeals to Jessica. Again, Jessica is holding the weight of the world. The fate of every teenager in Sweet Valley is depending on Jessica talking them back to life. And when the doctor told Jess, get her in the squad, I was like, this is insane. And then it turns out that for Annie to live, Jessica has to convince her that she really means it, that she really wants her on the squad. And that's how Annie's going to live. And then that is actually what happens. And my scrawls at this point are.
Oh, I stopped taking notes.
I wrote in huge scrawls, I wrote, "This is insane. What? The doctor saying she should be on the squad. There are bigger issues at play here." And then Jess says, "If you don't come back, I will also die." And then we get Annie's perspective and it works. Like she basically hears Jessica and is like, great. And then Mrs. Whitman's like, I guess I've been neglecting her.
And all of a sudden she's going to be a good mom.
Yeah, all of a sudden she's going to be a good mom and it's over. It really bothers me. Like this happens a lot on TV shows too. When, just in general, when like an extreme, like a crisis, like either like a medical sort of crisis or like a car accident or like something that sort of put people's lives in danger is the way that like interpersonal conflicts get automatically resolved.
Yeah.
And this obviously is an example of that. And I just find it extremely frustrating because number one, it just like sends, I guess, some fucked up messages. But number two, it also sort of like places these lessons in a realm that is sort of like not accessible to like every day, because it's like that doesn't happen in everyday life. Like maybe she would have done a suicide attempt, but like most of the time you're not going to have these big crises that are the way that things get resolved. And so in the absence of that, how would this have been resolved? Like if she wouldn't have gone to this dramatic extreme of attempting suicide and that being the thing that like brought everyone together and made Jessica have empathy and like now she's on the squad and now everything's good, it's like what would have happened? You know what I mean? Like I want to read that story because that's more.
Yeah. What's the other thing that's interesting is in Power Play, I thought that Robin, like that was my read of that, and who knew?
Well, because they implied it. They implied it,
and it's like that was Pascal's gun there, and she was like, "Oh no, wait for this one to happen."
Mm-hmm.
It's handled seriously. It's not as if they don't handle the self-harm as like a big problem, but it is used as like almost like a Deus Ex Machina. Like it's like this is how it all gets resolved, and it's disturbing to me because I mean the message that the Annies who are reading this book get is like the only way that you will be redeemed and that people will see your change is if you do something very drastic that really harms yourself.
And the only way you'll get attention from your parent. Yeah, and I think also just that it doesn't sort of really address the fact that like, aside from Mrs. Whitman being like, I realized I've not been attentive enough, there isn't really much in the way of like her attempting suicide is not reducible to the exclusion of her from the cheerleading squad.
Right.
And like to make that be the problem or the like reason why she did this. And so then like reversing that undoes this is like very myopic.
Yeah.
Do you want to read the cliffhanger?
It sucks though. Sorry. I feel it's not that the cliffhanger sucks. It's just that like they interjected in the middle of like a pretty stressful time for us in the book. This whole Suzanne Devlin's coming, who's going to go to New York and who's not.
The Wakefields announced that they're going to have a house guest. Susanna Hanlon, which is the daughter of, I think, a work colleague or someone that the parents know, is going to come stay with them for 2 weeks from New York. She's sophisticated, has lived all over the world. And one of the twins, and it's TBD who, or how they're going to determine who, is going to go to New York for a couple of weeks. So they're going to do like a 2-week exchange.
And don't worry, Suzanne Devlin.
She's beautiful.
And who tells us she's beautiful?
Ned.
So gross. Ned.
Pervert.
You're talking about your college roommate's daughter, you perv.
And literally they say something like, oh, it's going to be so interesting. She's lived all over the world. She's probably had such cool experiences. And he's like, and she's beautiful. It's disgusting.
And I wasn't invested in that because I was so invested in like Annie being okay. Annie, are you okay? Are you okay, Annie? Etc.
Yeah.
That it just felt like inappropriate personally. And then they're leaving the hospital and they've just like completely forgotten about Annie. And they're like, come on, let's get this heat moving. This is D-Day. I know it is, Elizabeth replied. Just don't be in too much of a hurry. We don't want decision day to turn into disaster day. Well, said Jessica, who's going to New York and who's going to stay here and show Suzanne Devlin around? You tell me. I wish I knew. Let's just get home so we can both find out. Elizabeth, with uncharacteristic impatience, pushed her foot down hard on the accelerator and the red Fiat Spider zoomed toward the Wakefields' house. 2 weeks in New York City for one twin, and 2 weeks showing off the fabulous, glamorous Suzanne Devlin of New York, Paris, and London. Both girls were filled with anticipation as they pulled into the driveway, jumped out of the car, and raced toward the house. Both twins got more than they bargained for. In Sweet Valley High number 11, too good to be true.
Thoughts, feelings?
I just was so stressed and overwhelmed with the whole Annie of it all that to then be like, who's going to New York? It's like, Annie's in life or death shit here. And so whether you go to New York or not for 2 weeks does not rate with me. Sorry.
No, I completely understand that. but I am excited. I'm excited for the next one. I'm excited for the next one. Something happens in it interesting. Ah. Thanks for listening to Sweet Valley Hive, hosted by Robert Marks and Rebecca Pardo. For more, check out our Instagram at Sweet Valley Hive. Theme song by Yessie and artwork by Elliot Carroll.